Everything still good?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, as Dr. Mika said, my name is Seth Speerstra, and my research is entitled Arachne's Tapestry, Women's Voices in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The topic presents a significant analytical challenge because the writing of Roman women has not survived to the modern day. I therefore had to try and find their voices within male-authored sources. My search led me to the Augustan-era poet Ovid and his epic poem, The Metamorphoses, from 8 CE, a source that for its time appears to be unusually sympathetic towards women. My goal was to examine how Ovid depicted the experiences of Roman women. I first performed a meticulous linguistic analysis of the Latin text with a careful eye to Ovid's word choice and how he frames his stories. Second, I delved into other contemporaneous primary sources, as well as secondary scholarship, to gain a better picture of women's place in Roman society. Using a comparative lens, I was able to identify places where Ovid's stories reflected genuine elements of the female Roman experience, as well as ways in which Ovid differed in his depiction of women from other authors. Rome was, of course, a very strict patriarchy since its founding. Women were subordinate to men in virtually all circumstances. They were considered weak and in need of constant protection, as well as vulnerable to moral failings and corruption. At the time Ovid was writing, Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. A major part of his political agenda was moral legislation intended to return to old-fashioned Roman virtues. The Julian laws were supposed to restore the family unit as the backbone of Roman society. In practice, this took the form of cracking down on adultery, specifically female infidelity, making marriage a legal requirement, encouraging childbirth, and reinforcing strict gender roles. In effect, Ovid was writing in a time when morality, especially the morality of women, was being supervised to an unprecedented extent. Therefore, it is especially noteworthy that Ovid's Metamorphoses go out of their way to demonstrate that women were treated unjustly by Roman society. The poem contains many stories about rape and sexual assault. In fact, Ovid depicts rape very seriously and realistically. Often the male rapists in the stories try to pass off their assaults as love or seduction, but Ovid's language and his depiction of the effects of rape on the female victims show that this was a falsehood. In addition, Ovid discussed how notions of Roman chastity sought to control women's sexuality, the unjust treatment of female victims, and Roman women's desire for agency and independence. Historians continue to debate on whether or not Ovid is authentic, that is, to what extent Ovid is actually sympathetic towards women's suffering. My paper is steeped in the works of historians Amy Richland and Leo Caron. Richland compares reading Ovid to, quote, watching a magician saw a lady in half. She finds that Ovid presents a fanciful but macabre depiction of violence against women. Caron, on the other hand, argues that through the grimness of the Metamorphoses, Ovid, quote, exhibits a sympathy for women and an attempt to understand, as well as a man can, women's intellectual and emotional life. I, for my part, tend to agree with Caron's viewpoint. After carefully examining the sources, I found that Ovid depicted women with a critical eye towards their emotions and towards their relationship with broader society. The story of Daphne contains the first sexual assault in the entire poem. The god Phoebus lusts after Daphne, who only escapes being raped by transforming into a laurel tree. However, Phoebus then plucks the laurel from her branches and makes the laurel wreath his symbol, his sacred tree. Despite Daphne's resistance and transformation, Phoebus still possesses her. He still violates and appropriates her body by claiming the laurel. The fact that the laurel wreath goes on to become a symbol of the Roman Empire and of Augustus is emblematic of Daphne's continued trauma and objectification. This story showed that, in Ovid's view, rape was not just about lust, and certainly not about love, but about power and asserting one's power over another. In the story of Scylla, Ovid indicts the impossible standards of Roman chastity and the ways in which Roman society tried to control women's sexuality, through explicit and implicit pressures. After Scylla rejects the love of Glaucus, a sea god, he asks the witch Circe to use her magic to make Scylla love him. Circe, who herself loves Glaucus and envies Scylla, transforms Scylla into a monster instead. The transformation only affects Scylla's lower half, particularly her legs and her abdomen, and the scene uses verbs like inquinare, foedare, and truncare, which carry meanings of pollution, defilement, and mutilation. Scylla's transformation, therefore, is a metaphorical rape. This story could be read as Scylla being punished for rejecting men, but Roman culture highly valued virginity as well, and Scylla was safeguarding her virginity. Scylla, therefore, was caught in between opposing cultural pressures. In that sense, she was punished not because she did something wrong, but because she never could have done right. Scylla's story recalls the epithet univira, a term of honor bestowed upon women who only ever slept with a single man, their husband. The pressure to maintain that status was opposed, however, by Augustus requiring that women remarry after a divorce or her husband's death. Again, there were opposing pressures. A common theme in the Metamorphoses is women being blamed and punished for doing nothing wrong. Callisto is one of the strongest examples of this. She is one of Diana's virgin huntresses. One day, Callisto is raped by Jupiter, the king of the gods. When Diana learns of this, she banishes Callisto because she now considers Callisto a source of pollution. Then Jupiter's wife Juno appears, furious at Callisto and her beauty for seducing her husband. So she transforms Callisto into a bear. In summary, Callisto is violated by the most powerful person possible, and then told she is unclean, and then told it's her fault for being too beautiful, and then she is no longer considered human. In Roman mythology, Juno is the goddess of marriage and childbirth, a protector of women. But in Ovid, Juno is the whip meant to keep women in line. Callisto demonstrates how Roman women were always teetering on the fringe of society. One slip up and it didn't have to be their fault, and they were ostracized. Finally, in the characters of Arachne and Philomela, Ovid demonstrates Roman women's ability to advocate for themselves. Both women are opposed by very powerful people. Minerva, a goddess, wants Arachne to attribute the beauty of her weaving to Minerva's gifts rather than her own skill. The Thracian king Tereus kidnaps, imprisons, and rapes Philomela. Both Arachne and Philomela resist their victimizers' attempts to demean and oppress them. Arachne weaves a magnificent tapestry depicting scenes of gods raping mortal women, proving that her skill exceeds Minerva's and unveiling the depravity of the gods. Philomela confronts Tereus directly with a fiery speech condemning his actions and promising to expose his crimes to the public and to the gods. These acts of defiance are ironic in a way. The Romans saw weaving as demonstrative of womanly modesty and chastity, yet Arachne uses a vulgar tapestry to insult a virgin goddess. A woman appearing and speaking in public, such as in court, was generally seen as indecent or shameful, yet Philomela vows to do exactly that, pudore proiecto, with shame cast off. In response to these acts of defiance, both Minerva and Tereus lose control of their tempers, threatened by these women's voices. When they threaten the women with violence, Minerva beats Arachne with a rod and Tereus draws his sword. Arachne and Philomela face death with courage. By refusing to submit, they again defy their own oppression. As a result, Minerva and Tereus silence them instead. Arachne is horrifically transformed into a spider, reduced to a state of insignificance. And Philomela has her tongue cut out so that she can never again speak of her own suffering. In these stories, Ovid asserted that the most revolutionary thing Roman women could do is speak, and he demonstrated how much this threatened and terrified the powerful. I argue that Ovid had an almost modern perspective on the situation of women within his society. He wrote against the curve, demonstrating how Roman women lacked power and asserting that this was a problem in Roman society. In this way, Ovid was arguing against traditional gender roles and the belief that women were subordinate. More important, however, than what the Metamorphoses say about Ovid is what they say about Roman women. I think that the issues discussed within this epic suggest that these conversations about women's status in society were being held even in antiquity. It suggests that there may have been Roman women openly expressing their experiences and feelings, and that there were other people listening to them. On that note, I'll end with a nod to the work of another historian, Dunstan Lowe, who traced the origins of Scylla, who I mentioned earlier, as she appeared in Ovid. Lowe argued that the first person to combine Scylla, the sea monster from Homer's Odyssey, and another Scylla, the maiden loved by Glaucus, the sea god, was not Ovid, but an earlier female Greek poet named Hediale of Attica. Only a tiny fragment, about half a dozen lines, survives of Hediale's work, but it's very likely that she inspired Ovid's own interpretation of Scylla. Therefore, by reading Ovid, it is possible to hear, if not ancient women's voices, at least their echoes. I would like to thank Dr. Meekles and Dr. Salzman for their mentorship, and Dr. Salzman for commentating today, as well as Dr. Christopher Simon for helping me with a lot of the translations. Thank you.
Please stop recording. Thank you so much.